Everyone knew that Mr. Zchxz was guilty. Everyone also knew that Mr. Zchxz was rich. That's why he lived in a giant house on the end of Hill Street. It's the reason 6 of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state were by his side at the funeral. It is, in fact, the reason that no one went to jail after they laid his wife and young son in the ground. He said he wasn't guilty, but everyone knew how dangerous he really was, and no one questioned why he never shed a tear. Don't go trick-or-treating at the Zchxz house on the end of Hill Street. Every parent in town would say this to their children. The kids would roll their eyes because they heard the same warning dozens of times. So when little Susie Walker, 4 feet tall, walked up to the Zchxz driveway on Halloween night, she was all alone. She smiled innocently as her little black cape bounced along behind her, head bobbing slightly as she worked her way up the steep path. Mr. Zchxz looked surprised when he opened the door. "Hello there, little girl. I wasn't expecting any trick-or-treaters." He looked around her. "Are you all alone?" "Yep," she squeaked with an innocent smile. Mr. Zchxz looked up and down his driveway again and began to smile himself. "Why don't you come inside? I might have some candy in my kitchen." He stepped aside, and little Susie Walker trotted right in. He quietly closed the door behind her. When he looked back, she was staring at him. "I'm pretty hungry, you know." He nodded, rubbing his hands together. I can understand that hunger. Please, follow me." She didn't move. "It's been a while since I've eaten, you know. One meal can sustain me for quite some time, so I like to be selective in my choices." Her feet remained in place, but her hand reached up and locked the door. A smile grew on her face, and fangs grew from her gums. "And screams taste like candy, but I bet you already knew that." No one who looked like little Susie Walker was ever seen again, but she wasn't missed. That's because no one by that name lived in that town. Anyone, except for the reclusive Mr. Zchxz, would have known that. Mr. Zchxz was never seen alive again. He wasn't missed either, but that was for different reasons altogether. If you happen to find yourself alone at night on Oakwood Road, with no moonlight nor a friend at your side, pray that you don't hear the laughing coming from the dark behind you. It starts out as a small laugh, a schoolyard giggle. It's high and sweet, like that of a young child. You turn, startled by the sound. Why is a small child out so late at night, especially on a road like Oakwood? Then you begin to wonder why you're alone on a road like Oakwood, so late at night. Especially when you hear that laugh again. It's louder this time. It sounds like the laugh a twisted little kid would make after he pushed his mother down the stairs. How can a laugh sound like that? You don't know. Your head snaps around, and this time you see something standing in the middle of the road, about 5 yards back. It's small, about the size of a child. It looks like a kid, dressed up for Halloween back in the early 1900s. You know, one of those homemade costumes, but it's nothing as innocent as that. The costume is nothing more than a brown sack with 2 holes cut out for eyes, and a blue onesie. The "I just pushed my mommy down the stairs" laugh is coming for it, but not for long. It soon begins to croak, like father came home, found mommy dead at the bottom of the stairs, and is wringing the wicked child's neck. Then there's a snap, and all goes silent. Its head falls to the side at an unnatural angle, and that's when you begin to run. You get all the way home and crawl under your covers. You can't stop shaking. What was that? Did you dream it? Or did that really happen? The sound of your front door opening causes you to sit up in bed. Did you lock the door behind when you came in? You came in such a hurry that you don't think so. You hear footsteps climbing the stairs. It feels like an eternity before they reach the top. Then there's the sound of small feet running down the hallway. Your door flies open, then slams shut. If you hadn't been terrified, you are now, but instantly your mind tries to rationalize it. Maybe one of your family members mistook your door for the bathroom, or even the door to their own bedroom. Although, you aren't sure why they would be coming in this late at night. From the darkness of your bedroom, you hear a small laugh. A schoolyard giggle. It's high and sweet, like that of a young child. It's coming from under your bed. You lie there, frozen, unable to move a muscle out of fear. Even as you hear it pull itself from under your bed with its small fingernails, even as it climbs into bed with you, even as it wraps its cold little hands around your neck and begins to squeeze. Everyone knew about the witch tree, which stood behind my school. When the school foundations were laid, an ancient grave was unearthed. So those old bones were buried in a bag beneath the old gnarled branches of the very tree from which the witch had been hanged. It was common knowledge that if someone ran 3 times counterclockwise around the tree on the midnight of Halloween, the witch would emerge and stab her disturber to death. Late one rainy October the 30th, I snuck out of my house to meet 5 or 6 other kids from my class and watched popular jock Mikey try the ritual out, but no witch met him, only distant thunder. Maybe the witch waits till later, when you're asleep, I suggested. What do you know about anything, Beetleborg? Laughed Mikey as he shoved me into the mud. He always called me Beetleborg, as I wore a big bad Beetleborg's backpack when everyone else wore a Power Rangers one. I was an odd kid, and this was the sort of thing I did. I was kind of right about the witch biding her time, as Mikey began to see her outside of his window on stormy nights, clutching her knife and staring through his soul with cold, dead eyes. Mikey never invited me to slumber parties, but these stopped soon afterwards anyways. As Mikey woke everyone up screaming about the witch trying to climb through his window, people started to make fun of Mikey. It truly is fascinating how fast someone can topple from their perch of popularity. Mikey was a mess afterwards. Jumpy, edgy. He'd scream when someone dropped a pencil on the classroom floor during a thunderstorm. The other kids stopped finding this funny and began to avoid him completely. You gotta help me, Beetleborg. You know about witches, right? He begged. A year later, my back rammed against a locker. I know they're peaceful. Misunderstood. Nothing like you describe, I said. I never saw the witch. No one else ever did, besides Mikey. That was the problem. Nobody ever believed him. Mikey still lives with his dad in the old neighborhood. He could never hold down a job and drifted into petty crime. Though he always claimed he was being framed, that the witch was playing her mind games. When stolen jewelry kept turning up in his room, he became a total social pariah. I've just heard that Mikey got himself confined to a psychiatric ward. Turns out he tried to break the witch's curse by burning her tree to ashes one miserable windy night. And when that didn't work, he torched the school. I'm on my way to visit my old school friend now. He really doesn't want to see anyone, but I phoned his dad to ask what room he's in. Maybe I can figure out which window is his by counting them along. It's a stormy night. He could use my company. On the car seat beside me is my Beetleborg's backpack with my large plastic dagger and an old witch costume inside. 23 kids, no more. That was the plan. It was my therapist's suggestion that I give out candy this Halloween, and I'd been making such progress that it sounded like a good idea. I moved to this quiet hamlet at her recommendation. After all, the familiarity of a small town should help with the paranoia, she said. And it has, until tonight. I never understood how any sane individual can celebrate Halloween, a night when masked strangers holding knives and axes can stroll up to your doorstep and your neighborly duty is to open up. Might as well stamp a bullseye on your chest. But the doctor says this is what normal people do, so I figured I'd try. 23 kids, 16 teenagers, and 70 adults in this town, all known by name and address. None of them psychopaths by my reckoning, so I figured I could tolerate the masks long enough to answer the door. Adults don't need candy. Teens could be turned away. I just had to hand out 23 sweets, max, and then I could lock up and be done with this horrible night. Then child 24 knocked on my door. I'd already thrown the rest of the candy away. I grabbed a bag of pretzels from the pantry, shoved it into her pail, and slammed the door. Since then, 2 more have come onto my porch. I didn't answer. This town's barely on any map. No reason to come here just to trick or treat. No one has family visiting. I would have cataloged it. No double dippers. I'd noticed the same costume twice. There are people out here who shouldn't be. I've already opened the door to some of them. They know I'm here, and they know I'm alone. Only 2 cops in this whole town, and they'll be working parking at the festival. My car's in the driveway. If they're waiting in the yard for me to make a break for it, they'll get me for sure. I didn't watch them all leave. Idiot. The deadbolt will hold, but I can't watch all the windows. I have a bat under the bed. I have knives in the kitchen. I have a rope in the garage. They won't get me. Sam surveyed her haul and congratulated herself on her cleverness. She figured out how to fill a Halloween pail in a village with only a dozen houses. Throw a bedsheet on top of your werewolf costume. Wear a goblin mask over your zombie makeup. Double the costumes, double the prizes, as long as the adults didn't catch on. Her classmates all reported that the ploy had worked wonderfully, except at the house on Maple, which had stopped giving out candy halfway through the night. Sam had peeked through the windows when no one answered on her second go-round and saw a strange decoration in the garage. Why hang something like that where no one can see it? Then again, that guy had always been odd. It was the Halloween of 2002. I was a kid then, bursting at the seams of my blue light special mummy costume, eagerly hefting my bag of sugary spoils door to door. Other creatures accompanied me. A 10-year-old vampire covered in her mother's pancake makeup, and a plastic-faced werewolf who lived just down the street from me. Together we haunted the stoops of our community, looking to glut ourselves on chocolatey goodness. At one point, we noticed 4 strange figures wearing cheap skeleton costumes and carrying empty pillowcases. Strangeness is to be expected on such a night, but the size and gait of these particular trick-or-treaters honestly gave us a pause. None were over 3 feet tall, nothing surprising there, but they shambled rather than walked. I remember feeling that they didn't belong, not just to the neighborhood, but to the world itself. But we were young, and our intuition soon disappeared beneath a tide of crinkling wrappers and candy apple fantasies. Sometime later, we saw them again, walking down the steps of the Garrett residence, where once they had been short and shambling, now they stood a foot taller, and bold steps replaced their strange shuffling. Their pillowcases were hefted over their shoulders, the now darkened bags clacking against their backs as they strode away. We looked to the Garrett house with questioning eyes. It responded with an anguished moan, a decidedly human wail of misery that called us through the rusted teeth of its screened door. We ran screaming, each of us racing for the safety of our respective homes. As I tore around the final corner to my house, I found that all was dark and quiet, except for the wet clattering of bags. I watched as the skeleton kids came down my porch steps. They were even larger now, taller than I was, and moved as surely as any 12-year-old I've ever seen. They hopped and skipped past me without a glance, their pregnant pillowcases rattling with a sick percussive melody. Inside my home, my barely recognizable parents laid sprawled out before me. They were little more than glanteous pools of confused features, their only semblance of humanity spilled from their mouths. They were moaning faintly, soft, desperate wails that contained all the horror of the world. When the night was finally over, authorities said that over 8 houses had been visited, each showcasing the same scene. I overheard the coroner marveling at how the victim's bones could have possibly been removed. I didn't know how, but I know who. All of us kids did, but nobody listened. 15 years later, we keep the doors locked and the blinds drawn on Halloween. We let the shadows alone embrace this once festive day. Their boneless black corpses have thus far been enough to dissuade the skeleton kids. May we never again hear the rattle of stolen bones or the cries of stolen souls. I'm not familiar with the history of the house, except to say that it looks like any other house on my street. The only difference is that it's been abandoned for many years. Also, every year, on Halloween, a jack-o'-lantern appears on its front porch. No one knows who puts it there. Costumed kids would walk up to the house thinking someone will give them candy, but no one answers the door. One trick-or-treater, who was obviously annoyed, kicked the jack-o'-lantern over. The jack-o'-lantern rolled off the porch and disappeared into the tall grass beyond. That child never returned home. Friends that were with him stated that he rounded a street corner just ahead of them and mysteriously vanished. Police scoured the area, but to no avail. The following year, the same jack-o'-lantern appeared on the front porch of the abandoned house again. A girl dressed in a Little Red Riding Hood outfit approached the house with her mother. When no one answered the door, the mother, thinking that the occupants must have turned in, decided to snuff out the candle within the jack-o'-lantern. She figured she was doing the occupants a favor. Later that night, 911 got a strange call. A frantic young girl explained that her mother was being attacked by an invisible man. Police arrived at the home to find the young girl dressed in a Little Red Riding Hood costume, crying and clutching onto the dead woman. The girl's mother was a victim of asphyxiation. No one was charged with the crime. By now, the legend of the abandoned house with the mysterious jack-o'-lantern began to spread. Kids would dare each other to approach the house. One boy, Anthony Randall, took it upon himself to not only accept such a dare, but to take it a step further. He stomped on the jack-o'-lantern, pulverizing it. On the way home, Anthony was killed by a hit and run, as in the above cases, no perpetrator was ever caught. I decided this year to put a stop to this. I went to the abandoned house with 2 buckets filled with candy and a folding chair. I set myself up next to the jack-o'-lantern and waited. I pleasantly greeted all the trick-or-treaters that came by. As the evening came to a close, I looked at the jack-o'-lantern and said, "There, you won't harm anyone this year." I had saved people from harm, or so I thought. The following morning, I awoke in a bed that was not my own. My confusion quickly gave way to panic when I realized I wasn't in my house. I was in the abandoned house. I've been trying to get out for some time now, but the doors are bolted from the outside, and I can't seem to break the windows. I pray someone will hear me and come to my rescue. But when I look out the front window, all I see is that jack-o'-lantern smiling at me. The doorbell rang for the 5th time around 9, right as I was about to turn out the lights. Older kids, probably too old, out chancing their arm one last time. I was happy to oblige. Every bowlful that went out the door kept the adult onset diabetes further at bay. I gave out most of the jumbo marshmallow things my wife had made, which were received with skepticism until I unwrapped one and took a bite myself. I only poisoned the Snicker bars this year, I said. The marshmallow pops are all good. When the knocker went after 10, I was mid-around in Battlefield, so I had to make a special effort to open the door with a smile. This time, it was just one little kid in a plastic skeleton mask and what looked like a bin liner as a costume, like he'd wandered here from 1987. I gave him everything we had left at the door and went back upstairs with a fresh beer to try and salvage the game. The letterbox smacked twice at 11:45, and I leaned out of the spare bedroom window, hoping to get the jump on whoever was messing with me. To my surprise, it was a group of 5 little kids with their bags held out in anticipation. I switched on the spooky light show and went out back for whatever we still had laying around. I was just about able to rustle something up from each of them by raiding my personal stash. "Is it not getting a little late?" I asked, but they shuffled away without a reply. We were asleep when the doorbell rang at 1 a.m. I stood on the stairs in disbelief for ages. Shadows moved on the frosted glass of the door. "It'll be those teenagers back from their party," said my wife. "There's still marshmallows I didn't use. Just hand them out before they do something stupid." So I did. With one leg behind the door, suddenly, an arm snatched the bag whip fast. They ran off in a chorus of banshee laughter. That was it. We were cleaned out. We had nothing to give to the hooded crawling things at 3:30 a.m. The spindly figure pounding on our door at 4. The murmuring mob at 5:20. The conjoined twins chanting our names at 6. Nothing for the pig boy crying like a cat. The skinless priest quoting the book of Judas. The man-sized crow with its beak snapping against the glass. "It's all a prank," I said, not quite believing it. Around 10 a.m., my wife wearily remarked that the sun should have come up. Halloween had gone wrong. It's after 2 p.m. now, and the power's out. It's still dark. Our phones are dead, and there's nothing but static on the radio. I just heard something moving around on the roof. We've broken up some old cooking chocolate into sandwich bags as a distraction. We're gonna make a run for the car. David and his brother Michael had been trick-or-treating through the entire neighborhood on this Halloween night, and they had a pretty good haul. This was still a safe enough town that some kids their age could still go around on their own to get candy, since there were plenty of adults out to watch everyone. Old Mr. Jones stood in his front yard dressed as Frankenstein, playing Monster Mash through some old speakers, and Billy Hudman's mother stalked up and down the street like an old hen, keeping watch to make sure none of the kids wandered too far or got into trouble. That didn't stop David's brother, however. He was known throughout the town as Jailbreak Mike, for no grown-up could hold him. "Keep close," Michael said to his brother while leading the way through the neighbor's hedge line. He had promised to show David something cool and spooky for a perfect Halloween night. Nothing but dim stars shone above as they ran through the pitch black of the neighbors' backyards and climbed over fences, eventually coming to an old house beside a creek covered in old brick and moss that looked as if it had been abandoned for decades. Michael crept around the side of the house and motioned for his brother to follow. Around the side of the house was a door to an old root cellar. At Michael's beckoning, David grabbed the handle, and they both barely managed to pry it open and climb down, lowering the door closed behind them. Inside, the air was musty and smelled of old, rotting vegetables. Michael waved his brother toward the back and swept the heavy dust away from a safe that was buried in the ground, barely visible. "It was open the first time I came here. Let's see if we can pry the door," he said, as the two boys each grabbed a handle and began to pull. Then David heard a loud slam as the cellar door was thrown open, accompanied by the sound of a large person descending the ladder into the cellar. His brother yelled for him to hide, but the empty cellar provided no real cover as he scrambled to conceal himself under a shelf. Heavy footsteps pounded the dust, finally stopping near David before a large pair of hands pulled him from the dirt floor, kicking and screaming. When he heard a familiar woman crying, he looked to the entrance to find his mother running toward him for an embrace. "What were you thinking? Why did you come to this old house? You could have been trapped." "Mom, Michael brought me to show me it." "David, your brother disappeared 3 years ago on Halloween. You were 6, but you remember this? Why would he bring you here anyway?" David thought for a moment, then had a horrified thought as he looked toward the old safe. "Oh God, Mom, I know where he is." It was a stupid rule. The whole point of celebrating Halloween was pretending you were someone or something else. I mean, I guess aside from either getting a sack full of candy or hitting on a slutty insert literally anything year. But with the rise of terrorism, another wave of clown criminals, and the protesting against whatever other thing you've been appropriating, the government said they were sorry, but they had no choice. It became an issue of national security. Honestly, it felt like the barcode tattoos were only a couple years away. Of course, they were certain places you could still go to if you dreamed of becoming someone else. The modern speakeasy with a costume twist. Sure, you had to be careful about which type you found, what with furries and the BDSM community, but word traveled fast, and so I found myself in the basement of Henderson's Tavern. The available outfits felt a bit limited, but I reminded myself that beggars couldn't be choosers. I settled on the police officer, the regular, non-slutty version, and paid a price far above what they may have costed only a few years previously. The freedom would be worth it, all things considered. Within the hour, I was back on the streets, mingling with the crowded city folk, as though I was just another cop. On the outside, I played it cool. On the inside, my whole body tingled with excitement. I eventually used my disguise to lure a tasty little morsel of a co-ed down a less crowded alley. Her lips tasted sweet and full, a lovely appetizer for what was to come. She smiled seductively, pulling me further down the alley so we could go about our business uninterrupted. I made her scream like you wouldn't believe, with pleasure at first, and then horror as I introduced her to my own entrails. They felt slick and soft, speaking to the high quality of the skin suit I wore. And to think I'd be upset I couldn't be a clown anymore. Everyone in our little town celebrated Halloween when I was a child. No decorations were ever put up, nobody ever threw parties, but the stores would all be sold out of candy come the big night. It had been that way ever since the dead in our town started coming back on Halloween, years before I was born. Corpses would claw their ways out of their graves, wandering the streets and carrying makeshift bags fashioned from their burial clothes. Zombies always craved brains in the movies, but in our town, all they wanted was candy. My mother once told me that some of the townfolk fought back when it all first began. Those families didn't last long, and none of them remained. Ever since, people gave their candies to the restless dead, leaving none for us kids. I was 11 the year my brother decided to go trick-or-treating. He crept into my room, and I would have screamed had he not clamped his hand over my mouth. His face was a horror show, his features a rotting mess. He seemed pleased at my petrified reaction to his makeup, and he smiled crookedly. I asked him what he was doing, dreading the answer, and he told me he was going to get enough candy for both of us. Our parents were focused on the hungry dead, and they had no idea my brother snuck out of his bedroom while I begged him to stay. I watched him shamble away into the night, moaning convincingly as he mingled with the sea of walking death. I didn't see him again until next year. My parents had fallen apart after my brother's disappearance, and I was tasked with handing out candy at an age when my peers were still hidden, safely away in their beds. The night seemed to be drawing to a close when I heard the telltale scratching of a corpse at my door. I opened it to find my lost brother standing on the front porch. His makeup had washed away long ago, but his face was more gruesome than I remembered. Much of his flesh had been torn off in vicious mouthfuls, the ragged edges of the bites never healing. A dirt-caked lollipop was stuck in what remained of his hair. He held out his bloodiest shirt and groaned at me, his cloudy eyes showing no recognition. I said nothing as I dropped a handful of candy into his jerry-rigged bag. He turned and shuffled slowly down the driveway, and I watched him go with a pang of sadness. At last, I knew how his night of trick-or-treating went all those months ago. I closed the door softly inside, comforting myself with the fact that I would see him again next Halloween.